Hello again and welcome back to one of our winter chats with Cotswold bees. Now the last time we did this, we actually asked for suggestions, and thanks very much for Peter for writing in and suggesting that we actually did a chat around swarm management. So we're just going to get ready with a nice cup of tea, and because this is going to be quite a long video, we've got a bit of cake as well. Now Carol's been making the clementine cake, but this time she's actually made it with blood orange because it's the time of year, slit it in half and actually put lemon curd down the middle. So I'm going to be in the fortunate position of being able to drink my tea and eat my cake while I talk to you about swarm management. So let's pop through into the lounge, have a seat by the fire and actually talk about swarm management. Well, let's see if there's anywhere to sit. At least Jill's on the floor, Eddie's in his chair. No, Molly's there. Trio's taking that one up. Well, at least there's the other chair. Not you as well, Willow. Well, Willow's the youngest, so she had to give up her chair. That's just the way it is. Now we're here to talk about swarm management. And remarkably, that's one of the most controversial things in beekeeping. I've no idea why. It seems to me that swarm management is entirely good for the bees, the environment and everybody else. But we need to talk through it and look at the advantages and disadvantages. Before we do that, however, let's talk about what actually a swarm is. So bees naturally will swarm when the colony reaches a certain size. That size has to be big enough for it to be able to split into two. And the old queen will take the old bees off, those flying bees, the ones over 3 weeks old, and try and form a new colony elsewhere. She'll leave behind the young bees, the brood, and also a queen cell, or 2 or 3 or maybe more, where they're actually making a brand new queen. So in theory, it's great. It's a natural thing for the bees to do. It's a sign of health because the colony is so large, and it means that we end up with 2 bee colonies in the world rather than 1. So it's got to be a good thing. And why should we interfere in swarming? Well, let's have a think about it. Swarming was great when there were lots of forests around and a natural environment, and people were very different to the way they are today. So swarm management is about actually splitting the bee colony when the bees want to swarm, making them think that they've swarmed so they don't have a problem, but also making sure that we don't have a problem in the environment generally. Let's begin by talking about why we don't want our bees to swarm naturally. Well, a bee swarm, if you've never seen one, is one of nature's absolute great wonders. And it looks a bit like this. So to beekeepers and anybody interested in the natural world, an absolute wonder. But to anybody who's never had anything to do with bees, it can be absolutely terrifying. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, we live in an environment where people are more and more divorced from nature. And many people won't have even seen a bee, let alone a bee swarm. If they swarm like this in the middle of a field in a nice rural environment, there's probably no problem at all. But if you're an urban beekeeper, bees swarming like this can cause a real problem. And I've been called out to many bee swarms that have been a real issue, including one where it's caused a major motorbike accident, where someone came round on their motorbike and actually rode into the swarm and then crashed. So we've got to be very, very careful about our bees and letting them swarm naturally. But let's assume that they've swarmed naturally, there's nobody about, no problem. What happens next? Well, they'll form up somewhere, usually in a tree, while the scout bees go out to look for somewhere for them to live. Now that's all very well and good, but once again, what happens if they're in an urban environment and this bee swarm settles on someone's car or the shop window and closes a high street, which has happened a number of times in London? We really don't want that happening. But let's assume again, no problem, and they fly off somewhere and they find themselves a new home. Now traditionally bees lived in trees and they'd fly off and find themselves a hollow tree and all would be well in the world. But in today's environment, they're very unlikely to do that. They're much more likely to fly into a house somewhere or a building, get themselves into a cavity somewhere and settle down. Now, some people won't mind. They'll say, that's great, I've got bees, I'm in the natural environment, all's well in my world. But regrettably, whether we like it or not, the vast majority of people are really not going to like this. What happens is they end up insisting that the bees are removed. Now in many cases they may well be in an area of the house where they can't be easily removed without actually damaging the house. And so when I'm called out to that type of thing, I'll tell the people, it's great, you've got bees, wonderful, they're not going to do any damage, leave them alone. Unfortunately, I live in the real world and I know that as soon as my back's turned, those bees are going to get a squirt of insecticide and they're going to be killed off. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately. I get called out all the time. I remember one in particular where I went to see a house with a lady who'd just moved into the house where bees had been present for many years. And she told me that they'd got to go. And I said, why? They're not going to do any damage. They've been here for many years. And she told me she'd got young children. And I said, well, that's great, get them to do a project on the bees. But she was worried they'd get stung and all sorts of crazy things like that. And when I went past a few weeks later, I noticed no bees flying, even though it was a summer's day. And I know what happened to those. And regrettably, in the real world, that's what happens. Whether we like it or not, bee swarms go into places they're not wanted and they get destroyed. But again, let's assume that the bee swarm ends up somewhere where they're either wanted or they're not causing a problem at all. They're in a nice hollowed out tree somewhere. Now, as climate change increasingly imposes itself on us, what we discover is we're getting wetter summers. And if that swarm has gone away, they've only got a couple of 3 days of supplies with them. If it rains before they get themselves established, that swarm's going to starve. And I've seen a number of swarms where they've gone off, established themselves somewhere, and then been unable to sort themselves out with regard to food and starved. And that's a horrible sight. And unfortunately, we're getting wetter summers, and so this is becoming more common. The other problem we've got with wetter summers is that the queen cell that's left behind, the new virgin queen has got to get mated. Now, she's only got a 3-week window in which to get mated. And so therefore, if it rains during that 3-week period and she can't get out as much as she needs to, she's not going to get mated properly. If that's the case, the old colony, or put another way, your bees, are going to die out. And so as a good beekeeper, hopefully you'll do your inspections and you'll realise there's a problem and buy a new queen in. But if you don't do it quickly enough, that's the end of the colony. So very easily we could have a situation where if we allow our bees to swarm, our existing colony dies out and the new colony either dies out or gets destroyed. And so really in today's modern environment, allowing our bees to swarm naturally really isn't very good for them, and it can be very bad for people around them and the environment generally. So what we want to do is make sure that we handle our bees properly and we make sure that they're still allowed to swarm, but we manage that swarm. Please notice I use the word manage the swarm, not control the swarm. We can't control bees, we can't stop them swarming, it's a natural thing, and we want them to be able to do it. We don't want to stress them. But we can use swarm management techniques that enable them to think they've swarmed and for us to end up in a good state. So what can we as good beekeepers do to ensure that our bees are kept healthy and that swarms are handled properly? Well, we're doing our regular inspections during the summer every 7 to 10 days, and we're likely to spot signs of them swarming. And what that will be is they're beginning to build queen cells and our existing queen is still around. And queen cells look like elongated peanuts, and there's a picture of one coming up now. So if we start to see these queen cells or swarm cells being produced, we can think about splitting our beehive. And there are many techniques that are available, but I use the artificial swarm, whereby what we do is split the old bees and the old queen from the young bees and the brood. Now, as part of this video, I've actually filmed doing an artificial swarm using an artificial beehive, and hopefully that will be of use. But the fundamental thing is that what we do is we persuade the bees to think they've swarmed. Now, we end up with 2 hives, and what we can do then is make sure that the old queen is still surviving and see if the new queen gets properly mated. At the end of that, we can either put the bees back together again if we only want 1 hive, or alternatively we can give the bees away to somebody who wants to start. So following on from this is a video as good as we can make it this time of year, showing you how to actually do an artificial swarm, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. So here we are at the artificial hive, exactly the same as a normal hive except for 2 things. One, no bees flying, so I don't need to wear my bee suits, and the other one is unfortunately they don't make any honey. I'm known to do an inspection exactly the same as I normally would. So I'm going to take off the queen excluder, I'll be taking out the dummy board, and then I'll be starting looking at my frames. So usual thing, support the frame, hive tool in, pull it back. This one's just a blank frame on the end, so I can pull that right back to the end. Then I can start my inspections. And so I can lift my bees out, I can take it through the vertical, I can turn it exactly the same as we've done before, and I can have a look. And what this relies on is you being able to spot queen cells. Now, when we did our first inspection, we found some queen cups, some play cups. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a bigger version of those, and we're looking for one that's got some royal jelly in it, or maybe even an egg in it. So basically, we're looking for something that looks like this. So that's what a swarm cell is going to look like. Now, sometimes, if you read the books, you'll read that if the cells are around the outside of the frame, the bees are going to swarm, and if the cells are on the inside of the frame in the middle, then the bees are actually going to supersede the old queen. You shouldn't take action. Now, my bees have never read those books, and so I'm never quite sure. So if you do an artificial swarm, you've got an insurance policy, there's no problem. Certainly if you've got a queen that's laying extremely well, you've got lots of eggs, lots of brood, it's very unlikely that they're going to supersede her. Also, have a look and see how many bees you've got in. If you've got a sealed cell that looks like this, and you've got a lot less bees than normal, you've missed it. They've swarmed and there's nothing to do other than put the beehive back together again and wait and let nature take its course. So, we've discovered we've got some swarm cells. They're not yet actually sealed, and so we can take action. So let's say I found some cells on this, not that one, but let's say I found them on this particular frame here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the frame back. I'm just going to take a drawing pin, and I'm going to pop a drawing pin into the frame so I know which one's got the cells on. Then I'm going to carry on with my inspection, and maybe that one's okay, but I come to this one I look at and I discover this one's got some swarm cells on, or some queen cells on that aren't sealed, and I'll pop a drawing pin in there, and I'll carry on doing my inspections. What I've got to do now is find that queen. And that's one of the advantages of having a marked queen, because if I don't find the marked queen, then there's no way I can do an artificial swarm. Let's go through, and let's say I've found that queen. And in fact, here she is on this cell here. I cheated. She's there before, so there's my queen. So I know she's on that particular frame there. Now what you could do is to pop her into a cage at this point, a little queen cage, or you could actually keep this frame in your hand and carry out the next bit, but it involves moving the frames and the hives around, so it's far better, unless there's two of you doing it, that actually you pick the queen up by her wing and pop her into a queen cage and just keep her on one side in your pocket while you do the next phase. So we'll pop this frame back, and then we're going to do the next phase of the artificial swarm. Now all you need to remember is two things with an artificial swarm. First thing is, a natural swarm is the old queen going off with the old bees. That's the flying bees, the ones that go out and collect nectar and pollen and bring it back. The second thing you need to remember is a bit weird. Bees don't know where they've flown from, they only know where they're supposed to fly back to. Bees are creatures that live in trees, and trees don't move. So a bee always assumes that it's flying back to the same place. So if I take this hive and I move it even 3 or 4 feet, then I'll end up with a pile of bees back here. So they'll fly out from over there, but they'll fly back to here, where they know as home. And we can use that to conduct the artificial swarm. So here we go. Remember, we've found queen cells. They're on these frames that have got the drawing pins on. So what I'm going to do now is I've got a complete set of new equipment, a new floor, brood box and roof, and I'm going to actually conduct the artificial swarm. So I'm going to take this box, I'm going to lift it up, and I'm going to move it all the way over to here. Now I've only moved it a relatively short distance. That's probably about 3 feet, 3 feet 6 entrance to entrance, but this is pointing in a slightly different direction. I'm then going to take a new brood box and I'm going to put it here where the old brood box was. Now inside this new brood box I've got frames here that I can use. These are standard frames with foundation in. If you've got drawn foundation, then that's all the better. But as a new beekeeper, you're unlikely to have that. So I've just got frames with normal foundation inside them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out 2 frames from the middle of here and pop them over here. I'm then going to take out the frame that the queen was on, and I'm going to move it back over to here. And I'm going to pop it in there. Now if my queen, I'd taken her off and I'd put her in a cage, I'd now release her back onto this frame. I'm then going to take from this hive over here a frame, and what I want is a frame a bit like, I suppose, yeah, this one will do. There's some capped brood on there, and there's some empty cells with some eggs and some brood in, and I'm going to put it here. And I'll fill up the gap with a couple of frames in here. Now all I want to do in here is leave, in this particular box, 2 queen cells. So I'm going to select the best queen cells and I'm going to destroy the others. So I'm going to leave 2 on this frame here. I'm going to take this frame out. I'll destroy the queen cells on here, just cut them out with my hive tool or squish them with my fingers. I can take my drawing pin off. Now let's think what's going to happen now. Well, all the older bees that are in here are going to fly out from this hive, but they're going to fly back to this hive here. So now in here we've got the old queen and the old bees. And so they will actually think they've swarmed. Here in this hive we've got the queen cells, we've got the young bees and the brood. So they think they've swarmed as well. So all's well in our world. So we can put these back together. Now the only difference is that these bees in here, if they'd swarmed naturally, would have gorged themselves on honey, so they'd have plenty of stores. These don't, because we've done an artificial swarm. So when I put them back together, when I put the crown board on, I'm going to put a feeder on with 1 pound of sugar to 1 pint of water, and I'm going to put that on to my crown board. Just put an empty super on, put the roof on there, put the crown board back on here, put the roof back on here, and then I'm going to wait 7 days. Here we are back at the hive and the artificial swarm 7 days later. So what we now need to do is, we've got the artificial swarm in here, we've got the original colony in here. This colony will still have some flying bees or some new flying bees, and the worry here is that they'll actually take one of those cells and the virgin queen, because there's a lot of bees in here, will actually go off and form a swarm and leave the other one behind. So what we're going to do now is what we call bleed off some more of those flying bees. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take this whole hive here with the stand and I'm going to move it to the other side of this hive here. So I'm just going to do that, and then let's actually see what the result is. So it's going to be a bit heavy. I'm going to have to take this off here, move the stand. It's much easier if you've got another stand. Take the stand and move it over to here and put my hive back on it. Now let's think about what's going to happen. The flying bees are going to fly out of this one here, and they're going to fly back to where this gap is, and so there's no hive here, but they are still fairly close to this hive here. And so what they'll do is, it might take them a little while, but they'll find their way into this hive here. And so we've bled off some of the flying bees from here, and so we're less likely to get what's called a cast, a small swarm going off with the virgin queen. Those bees will be accepted into here because bees work on a sort of bring a bottle party basis. If they're coming back with nectar or they're coming back with pollen, they'll be accepted into here. And so what we've done now is we've built this up even further. So let's just do a bit of a recap. This hive here is the swarm. It's got the old queen in it and it's got the old flying bees and they're building up. And we need to keep checking that feeder and make sure they've got enough food. And this is 7 days later, so maybe leave them another 3 or 4 days before we actually inspect and see what's going on. This hive here had got the young brood in and the queen cells. Now after 7 days, those queen cells will probably be getting close to hatching. It takes 16 days from when the egg is laid to when we actually end up with a new queen that's hatched. So it's very important we don't inspect this hive at all. But we do need to just check that they've got enough to eat. So what I want to do is just heft the hive, just pick up the corner of the hive and just heft it a little bit and see how heavy it feels. If that's feeling light, then give it a feed. Again, a 1-to-1 feed, 1 pound of sugar to 1 pint of water. So hopefully we'll have the old queen in here laying away with the colony building up well. We'll have, hopefully, a new queen in here that's got properly mated and started to lay some eggs. We don't want to inspect this hive though until at least 21 days after we did the artificial swarm originally. Give them time to settle down. Then we can have a look and see what we want to do next. If we want to increase our number of hives and we've got a good queen in here, she's got properly mated and she's a nice temperament, we've done it, we've doubled our number of hives. If we don't want to double our number of hives, then there's a way of putting them back together again. But that's a subject of another video and we need to come to that later on. But here we are, we've done an artificial swarm. If we've done it well and it's worked, both colonies have survived and the bees are in really good shape. So I hope you enjoyed that, I hope it's been helpful. Maybe it needs looking at 2 or 3 times before you feel confident to do it. It's pretty simple, but you do need to do it in stages. Have a look at the video, do each bit in turn, and go through the artificial swarm, and that way you'll end up with happy bees and a very happy beekeeper. Forgive me, just having some cake while you were away doing that. I have to say this is brilliant, one of the best ever. Recipe's over on the website if you want it. Now, I better put this down for a second. So hopefully that was useful. In the summer, when we get a hive that's trying to swarm, I'll do a video and show you how we do it in real life. But hopefully that was useful. As I said at the beginning of the video, swarm management is really controversial. I don't know why. Done well, it doesn't stress the bees, and we actually end up with both colonies surviving. It's really good. I no doubt some people will want to make comments. So if you do, please make the comments down below in the comments section. If you can, please try and keep them polite, because I know people get very emotional about swarm management and say that it's artificial and it's bad and all the rest of it. But if you've got some constructive comments to make, please make them. If there's just 1 or 2, I'll actually answer them in the comments section. If we get quite a lot, I'll do a video actually answering the comments along the way. But I do genuinely believe that good swarm management is good for the bees and good for the environment. If you've enjoyed it, then please subscribe and like the video, it really does help us. And also, if you've got any suggestions for another video that you'd like us to make, please drop the suggestion in the comments section below and we'll try and do that as well. So thanks very much for watching, enjoy your beekeeping, and I'm going to now go and enjoy the rest of this cake and finish my tea. So thanks again, happy beekeeping.